Ladies, my fellow mommies, we are always so busy, on the go, kids screaming in the back seat, sleeping babies. I have the ultimate hack for you.
Welcome to the Stay Fit Mom Podcast with Krista and Tracy, your go-to girls for health, fitness, and keeping it real in mom life.
If you can't seem to get in a good groove with your nutrition and exercise program, this is for you.
We've coached thousands of women using macros for over 8 years, and I'm well known around here for my 5-day meal prep videos.
What does a macro balanced meal look like?
Hit subscribe to the Stay Fit Mom Podcast and join us for a fun, meaningful journey toward a healthier, happier you.
You got this, Mom.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Stay Fit Mom Podcast. Today, I get to interview Tracy, and we get to hear all about her adoption story. Are we ready?
We're ready. Hi.
What do you want to start with? Just why you and Chris decided to adopt?
Well, I was thinking last episode when we interviewed you and we were just talking about how you've gone viral for all of these recipes. The only time that I have ever gone viral on my Stay Fit Mom Tracy Instagram or TikTok has been for our adoption story. When we were doing that adoption snip video for Chris, and we're all jumping up and down and we're like, we're done with kids. And then the next screen we jump and all the kids are in there. One of the comments was, I feel like I went from season 3 to season 6. So I thought that this would be a great episode to bridge the gap and tell everybody how this happened. Our adoption story might be the fastest recorded adoption in history. It was so fast. But in order to understand how Chris and I came to a place of acceptance of this so quickly, we really have to go back 10 years in our family's story so I can fill you in on all the pivotal points that got us to where we are now. So that's kind of where I wanted to start it, if you're okay with that.
Great. Yes, let's go back 10 years. Where are we starting?
Well, everybody heard the Stay Fit Mom story. We've kicked off Stay Fit Mom as this cute little hobby in 2015. And we're going into Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University in 2016 with $115,000 in pharmacy school student loan debt. And we kept telling ourselves that this wasn't really a big deal, that it's normal for people to have student loan debt. But the facts were that in 6 years of paying on Chris's student loan, we paid almost $65,000 in 6 years, and we'd only reduced the loan principal by $5,000. So we had this fire lit in us to just give this a go and try and pay off this massive student loan payment. And as I would watch Dave Ramsey's class, there would be so many parallels to macro counting. He would say things like, if you want to make big strides with your financial goals, you need to stick to your budget. And I feel like that's what I was kind of telling my clients at the same time. If you want to make strides with your health and your goals, you need to stick to your macro budget. And how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. There were just so many parallels between Stay Fit Mom and financially sticking to a budget. And we paid off $115,000 in 10 months, which sounds crazy and fast. And when we were predicting how long it would take, we were predicting like, oh, it's probably going to take 5 years, maybe 4 years, maybe 3 years. But neither Chris or I thought, 10 months, sure, we'll just get it done in 10 months. It was just so crazy. It was grueling. We had this pedal to the metal intensity. We didn't get our kids' haircuts. We didn't buy as much as a dish towel. We didn't go to restaurants. We worked all the time. Chris picked up extra shifts. And I was more passionate than ever to see Stay Fit Mom succeed and grow because so much of that success was contributing to this debt payoff for us. So we pay it all off in 10 months. And yet I had this deep conviction, just this firm belief in my heart that we had to keep going. And Dave Ramsey kind of says, once you pay off all of your debt, other than your mortgage, you can kind of let off the gas a little bit. Well, we didn't.
So you paid off $150,000 in debt, and then you decided you were going to conquer your mortgage debt.
And when you're dieting, all of a sudden you're drooling over the cake and the ice cream that you can't have. That's kind of how it felt with our finances. Like we were on this tight budget, and now all of a sudden I wanted to have the latest trending clothes. I wanted a Traeger grill. I wanted to get eyelash extensions.
I remember distinctly when you guys were doing this.
I just think my faith kept me so tethered to following through. I knew that we had to do this, but I didn't know why. there was no like carrot of, if you do this, then this will happen. It was just, you have got to put the pedal to the metal and you've got to do this. And then I have in here of my notes on October 3rd, 2019, Krista, we had some sort of Stay Fit Mom turning point. I don't know what it was. I can't remember it, but I felt so weary. I remember just feeling like, I am so exhausted. I don't even know if this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Am I supposed to be doing Stay Fit Mom? And I did something so radical, maybe spiritually immature. I kneeled down while Ollie was taking a bath and I just opened up my Bible, hoping that God would just speak to me. I don't know if you remember this conversation, Krista, but I told you about it that night. And I was like,
Mhm.
Krista might think I am an absolute wackadoo, but this is exactly what happened.
Well, I do remember at this point when you were exhausted and you were getting to your tipping point.
Yeah, and I feel like business owners don't really talk about that much, and we didn't really talk about that much in the first episode. We're like, "Oh, now look where we are." But there were so many points where I would be on my knees like, crying. This is so hard. This is so exhausting. I don't know if this is right. And it felt kind of like a house of cards. Is this all going to just crumble tomorrow? So I got down on my knees and I prayed and I opened my Bible and I was asking God, are you sure this is what you have for me? Have you called me to this? And I opened to Isaiah 45 and it says, I call you by name. I equip you that people may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is no other God besides me. I am the Lord. It's this story of Cyrus in the Bible, who is God's chosen instrument. It was the biggest comfort to my heart in a season where I was like, I don't know if this is really what God has for me. And I bring that up because now I see the forest through the trees and see all of what Stay Fit Mom and the growth and everything that we have done has brought us to. Anyway, I just had to bring that up because it was just so intense. So in April of 2020, we did it. We paid off our whole house and the debt that we started with. And so that was a total of $292,000 in debt. It took us 40 months. And we even went on the Dave Ramsey show and we did our debt-free scream. And I remember the host interviewing me and Chris and saying, what are you going to do with this new financial freedom? You're in your 30s. And Chris and I just looked at each other. We were like, we have no idea. We don't know what we're going to do. We did this huge thing. We don't know. But now I'm like, well, God had some plans. God had some big plans for all this new financial freedom. So I talked about in the first episode how we moved to Florida. The crazy thing about us moving is that the house that we have moved into, it took the exact amount of money that we had to the dollar to be able to get into the house that we're in, which is our dream home. And a place that we get to raise our kids in, not just our biological kids, but our adopted kids in. And our move from Las Vegas to Florida is actually Chris's testimony story. So it was an extreme time in our life, and we could do a whole episode on that in itself. But so anyway, so that's where we are up until this point. So we move here December 31st, 2020, and Chris is working as a full-time pharmacist. That was a tipping point for moving here. We had to make sure that Chris had the right job. And because he's in healthcare, he's going to church every other week. And I remember I had a friend that was like, he misses church every other Sunday. That's a really big bummer. I'm just going to pray about that for you. And I was like, oh, okay, well, thanks. He's done it for the last 12 years. I don't see that changing. And one of those Sundays that he could be at church at, I wasn't there. And it was actually, Krista, a weekend that I was on a retreat with you and
Right.
Kimber.
Mhm.
And the sermon was on adoption. Gosh, I can't remember what it was titled. It was titled something with adoption, but Chris called me on the phone that day and was like, Tracy, if you would have been here, we would have came home with several children. And I was just like, yeah, right. And I told him then, well, then I can't watch that sermon. And that was kind of my first response to adoption. I just was like, no, it's not for me. I'm not, you go ahead and have those feelings of conviction, but I will not be watching it because I don't want to have anything to do with that.
Which is hysterical now.
But one of the lines that Chris really held on to from that sermon was, do for one what you wish you could do for all. Because the idea of all of these children in the world need homes, all of these people in the world need help, is such an overwhelming feeling. What am I going to do about that? I live over here and yeah, there are children in Africa that are hungry. What am I going to do about it? Just that line, do for one what you wish you could do for all. That's the answer to this huge problem that we have in the world with all of these needs that are not met, that need to be met. Just do one thing. Do you have any questions so far, Chris?
This is great. I feel like I'm just listening to a good story.
So then I said this in the first episode in 2022, Krista and we need extra help. And the accumulation of everything we've worked so hard for and the direction that our family was moving, when we got to that point, the decision for Chris to stay home was so clear, but it also felt scary. The person in the real world that's like, well, what about insurance? What if,
Right.
what if? That person was terrified. But then there was this other side of me that was like, this is absolutely 100% what we have been moving towards this whole time. Chris being able to stay at home. This is the answer to that. He can't even go to church on Sunday prayer. This is the answer to more help for Stay Fit Mom growing more than we could have envisioned just the two of us. So fast forward a little more. In August of 2022, Chris and I were asked to be Sunday school teachers for second grade. And I have a teaching background. I love to teach. And I also love the idea of serving with Chris in this capacity. So we both said, yeah, sure, we'll serve in second grade.
I was just going to ask you, when you teach second grade, the second graders, is this on Sundays?
Yep, it's just second grade Sunday school. But there was this little boy in there. We do prayer requests every Sunday with these second graders, and their prayers are so funny most of the weeks. Krista, they're like, please pray that I don't have to clean my room this week. And then there was this there's this little boy that said, could you please pray that I could play a sport one day? Any sport. And Chris and I were just looking at each other and looking at this little boy. We're just a little bit of a sporty family over here, just a little bit. And I knew that this boy was in one of the foster families in our church's homes. So there's a bunch of foster families in our church, and these foster families have such a big role because they're taking emotionally traumatized kids that have been pulled from their existing familial relationship, and then they have to kind of rebuild and go to new schools and meet new people and jump into somebody else's family rules. And we know all of these families, and our church does such a good job of supporting and giving them resources on how to work with kids that have been through traumatic experiences. But anyway, so we are good friends with these foster families in our church. And so we knew that we knew that he was in this family's home. And I had said to Chris, just on a walk with Albus one day, I said, gosh, that boy Vinny is on my heart, and I don't know what's going to happen to him. Chris's heart was kind of already softened to the idea of adoption just because he had heard that sermon from the pastor. But I just thought, well, I'm not listening to that sermon, so I don't have to worry about God putting that on my heart. But God literally had to put this little boy in my lap.
I was going to ask you, had fostering or adoption come up since he would listen to this sermon and you need to listen to it and you weren't interested?
I remember the next Valentine's Day, Chris and I went on a date. And on Valentine's Day, we kind of love to set goals. Like, where do we see ourselves in 5 years? Are we going to take any big trips with our family? I just loved the idea of dreaming. I think that's so fun. So we did that on Valentine's Day. And we were like, where do we see ourselves in 5 years? And Chris said, we might have another kid in our family. And I was like, whoa, what? So side note, we find out that Vinny is not just Vinny by himself. Most of the kids that go into foster care have a sibling set. It's hardly ever just one kid. It's usually 2, 3, 4, 5. So we find out that Vinny has not just one brother, but also a sister who we've really never met. We don't know anything about the brother and the sister. We only know Vinny. And so I think just the idea that he had a brother and a sister, we just kind of put that way back in the back of our minds. We're like, well, maybe adopting one kid, but 3, that's just crazy. And so we didn't really think about it ever until it's January. And Vinny's prayers are amping up. They're changing over time. And his January prayer is, could you please pray that my great aunt would be able to take me? And Chris and I, we pretty much laid hands on that boy. We were like, yes. We were just so sure that after all these no's, after all this turmoil that this little boy has experienced, and it's extensive, this was for sure going to be a yes. We just felt it in our hearts. This little boy is going to get a yes. And so we're praying that his great aunt would take him. Come March, I'm really good friends with who is now our daughter, her foster mom. And we go to the beach one day. There's her and a couple other women. We're hanging out at the beach. And I had mentioned a few times, I feel like God is really putting adoption on our hearts. I don't know what's going on. At this point, we've taken not one class, Krista, nothing. We know nothing about the process. We don't know how many hoops we got to jump through. We're just maybe thinking about putting a big toe in the pool at some point,
Right. Right.
And Erin, who is our foster daughter's mom, said, unrelated, she was just like, yeah, we found out that the aunt was a no. And I could not stop crying. I was so overcome with emotion for another no for this little boy. Another no. She said no. And I finally called Chris on the phone and I said, I think we're supposed to take this little boy. And I know that sounds crazy because who adopts 3 kids? And to be honest, I kind of expected Chris to pat me on the back and say, simmer down, babe. Let's just start with one. Instead, he was like, well, let's just talk about where they'd sleep. Where would we put him? And then I was like, oh my gosh. I just start kind of panicking because I realized that he's going through the steps in this process to make this happen. And so, by God's grace, we have just enough bedrooms to legally make this work. But some of my concerns, the very first thought that came into my mind was, how am I going to feed that many people? It's so many people.
It surprises me that that was one of your big concerns because I feel like you've always very much been, come over for dinner, no problem. You are always so willing to feed anyone and everybody. So I just feel like, as much as you don't love to cook, I feel like you've always been great at making sure it gets done. You were
I
made
am
for it.
I am a big cooker, but it's one thing to invite somebody over once a week. It's another
know.
every day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I've got to feed 8 people. I have to bring this up because there were so many things that were also happening at the same time. Siege, who's our oldest, he's 14 now. He was riding a bus with a close family friend that had a son that was Siege's same grade, and they were riding the bus to 6th grade. And this family does life group with us. This family does this service project event that we do as a church, and they went to what's called Children in Crisis, and it's just this community center for kids that don't have a foster home to go into. So there's all these kids that are pulled out of their homes. It's kind of this huge compound, and people that are going to serve, we're just going there to play with the kids. This family went, and their 6th grade boy just hit it off with another 6th grade boy there. The next week at church, they were like, so we're adopting this boy. And Chris and I were like, what? Wait, what? You're adopting a boy that you met last week? That's crazy. And I think it was the first time in my life that it was somebody that I knew that was adopting an older kid, for one, not a baby. And they weren't pastors of our church. They also weren't infertile. This had nothing to do with fertility. They just saw the need and they were like, we're going to meet this need. We're going to take this boy. And it was such an encouragement to me to see this family just figure it out, make it work. And here we are with more things than I ever could have dreamed that I was ever going to have. And I remember at one point saying, if I had all the money in the world, I would do it. Sure. And then I'm like looking out into the bay at dolphins in my backyard. God's like, I've pretty much given you everything you've ever wanted. So move on with this family. So this family, they went back in 6 months to serve at Kids in Crisis again. They found another 6th grade boy. Come back to our life group. They're like, guys, there's this 6th grade boy and he needs a home. If any of you are feeling convicted, and nobody is raising their hand, pick me. Everyone's crickets. And the next week, Krista, they came home and they chose to adopt another one. They took
Oh my
2
goodness.
6th grade boys. I could
They have
not,
three
again,
sixth grade boys
yes,
now.
they've,
Wow.
yes. And I was just bawling my eyes out at the sacrifice because they saw the need. So that family was so inspiring to me. And they're military. They have since got up and moved. I'm like, oh, God just put them in our neighborhood for this season so that I could be a witness to that and knew what our next steps had to be. So back to me crying, Chris and I figuring out the logistics. And we had legitimate concerns like college. How are we going to pay for 6 children to go to college? That seems pretty outrageous. You have to start that from when they're babies.
Mhm.
And Florida has this amazing program where if you've been in the foster care system for over 18 months, you automatically have college paid for at a state. I think it's at a state university. I really need to look this up now that my kids are getting older, but basically they are scholarshiped into college as long as they get in. So that already felt like, okay, that was one burden that we had on the list of like, we can't do this because that was crossed off a list.
I remember you telling me this. The next one was health insurance too, right?
Yeah, so we're small business owners. Health insurance is a nightmare for small business owners. So health insurance was a big concern. They have Medicaid. They can apply to have Medicaid up until they're 27 because they've been in the foster care system for over 18 months. So we have no medical expenses, we have no college expenses, and then they also get a stipend. Nobody's getting into this process to make money because the amount that kids actually cost versus what the government's giving you doesn't even compare.
How long do you get the stipend? This is not just for foster care, this is for adoption.
Yeah, till they're 18. Yeah. So people are like, "How do you afford that?" Well, if you go through private adoption and you're trying to get a baby, yeah,
Mm,
you could be paying thousands and thousands of dollars. We've fundraised for people to be able to adopt babies, and it's 30 grand. You could be paying $30,000 for a baby. If you adopt out of the foster care system, we've paid nothing, Krista. We haven't had to pay even our attorney fees to get the adoption to be legal. Those are paid for.
nothing.
And
Do you
I
think
am
this is consistent in most states?
I
I don't
don't
know.
know. I really don't know, but I just want to applaud Florida because they've done such an amazing job at making it as least dramatic as possible. It's already gonna be
Mhm.
extremely dramatic. It's gonna be extremely traumatic for all that are involved. It's gonna be a lot. And so to say, you don't have to worry about college, you don't have to worry about healthcare, and we're gonna give you a little bit for groceries every single month. It's just a huge motivate like, "Okay, we can do this. We have the space, we
Mhm.
have the resources." So, then I'm like, "How do we even go about this? We've taken not one class. We don't know anything about this. Who do we even tell?" Because we certainly can't tell the kids. We would never wanna get their hopes up if it wasn't gonna happen. So we called our pastors. Our pastors are adopted parents. And we were like, we think we're supposed to take these 3 kids. And they are like, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe this. But they are having a staffing meeting Monday. A staffing meeting is basically periodically these cases, they have to have these big meetings. And at this point, they were going to decide who was going to be their families. And they had these families. One was in Miami. Basically, it's like kind of reminds me of the dating game. Here's all these kids and here's all these families that want to adopt, and they try and pair these families up with these kids. And our pastors were saying, "Are you sure? Because if you're sure, we'll put you in contact with the adoption coordinator." And they're having that meeting on Monday. They're about to pick a family that day. That afternoon, I was on the phone with the adoption coordinator, and Easter Sunday of 2023, it was the first time that we'd ever met our daughter in person. We had a big party at our house. We wanted to meet these kids and see them all play. Our biological kids had no idea. We're just kind of watching from afar, like a fly on the wall. I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but our 2 adopted sons were in one foster home and our adopted daughter was in another foster home. So at this point, they're separated. And adopting a sibling set was also very important to Chris and I because we kept thinking with the 3 boys that we have, imagine the trauma of losing your parents. That's one trauma. But then also the trauma of being separated from your siblings. I can't imagine going through that. The fact that we could reunite these 3 kids, what a huge blessing to be able to do that. So we watched them all play. And of course, I'm trying to get any sort of information. I guess our daughter told her foster mom, "Gosh, that house was so fun. I hope we get invited back." And that was the only clue that I had to hold on to. I was like, "Okay, she didn't hate us. She thought our house was fun, so that's good." The day after Easter, I got a call from the adoption coordinator, and she said, "We're skipping the staffing meeting, and we're just gonna move forward with your family." Because we already had a connection with Vincenzo, because we were his Sunday school teachers, we trumped the line.
What were the odds of them getting to stay together? That usually something that happens? Were these other families willing to take all the children?
I don't know that, but I think that's always plan A. Plan A is if there's anybody that's willing to keep the siblings set together, you're gonna get first priority.
Yeah.
But realistically, how often does that happen?
Obviously, it didn't happen in foster care, though. They were split up.
Yeah, and that really just depends what homes are available when the
Okay.
emergency takes place. They're just like,
Uh,
"Who's available?" And so many times they're split up, so many times. So we moved to the front of the line, and then the rat race. We had to jump through so many hoops, Krista, and rightly so, because they want to make sure that you're serious about this. It's like when you buy a house and you have to provide so many documents. There was all this paperwork. There were these classes that we had to take, trainings that we had to go through. We had to get certified. We had to get our home ready. There were just so many steps that we had to take. And our church held our hand through every single thing. I kind of got to back this up because we wanted adoption to be a decision that our whole family would make. We didn't want this to be me and Chris's decision because we have 3 boys that we got to think about. This is a life change for them. So we had asked them to start praying about adoption and what they thought of it. Our kids' responses were just all over the board. Siege, we told him earlier because he's older, more mature, and we didn't tell him anything about any kids. We were just like, hey, dad and I are praying about adoption. What do you think? His first response was, Ollie's not going to like this.
I do remember asking you about their ages and you explaining to me, or maybe I've heard this somewhere else, the importance of keeping that order. Siege is still the oldest and Ollie is still the youngest.
Yeah, we have kept the birth order. We still have the oldest. We still have the youngest. Siege was like, yeah, I think we can do this. Ollie was like, yes, this is going to be the best ever. Siege and Milo have somebody to play with. Now I'm going to have somebody to play with. He could only see the benefits and he was so excited. It was just a really cute, naive response maybe from him, but he was just gung ho and excited. But Milo, our middle, was like, no, mom, I don't think so. And we were like, okay. And we just were like, well, we feel very strongly that if this is supposed to be for our family, that God will change your mind. And when he does, or if he does, you just let us know, is how we ended it. And 3 days later, he came up to me and was like, Mom, I changed my mind. It was just so sweet. So lost my train of thought.
There was this urgency to quickly move forward, getting all this done and getting your house ready. I remember there was this deadline, right?
I mean, for one, the deadline had to do with these kids have been in a foster situation for over a year and a half. That's a long time to be in limbo. So we knew that the sooner that they could be reunited, the better for them long term. But 2, our family, so we're talking Easter. In June, our family was getting ready to go on vacation where we went to Las Vegas, where our whole family is. And we wanted so badly for all of our kids to meet the people that mean more to us in the whole world. We wanted them to meet the extended family. And so we kind of were like, is this going to get done in time for them to go on the airplane with us? And the adoption coordinator was like, yeah, I think we can make this happen. I think that they can. So we bought them airplane tickets right away. And then we got calls after that was like, oh, that was way too premature. She should not have said that. There's no way that this paperwork is going to be done by then. They needed fingerprinting. They needed background checks. Picture 100 steps. I was so devastated by that because I wanted this adjustment period to get going as quickly as possible.
And summer was coming, just summer in general, and having the kids home all day and together and adjusting. So at what point did the kids start spending time in your home?
I want to say pretty much right away. I posted a video on my Instagram. I posted a couple, but one was the adoption coordinator telling them that we wanted to adopt them. And that was such a scary moment for us. The amount of time I spent worrying and being so anxious. I remember telling our pastor's wife, we can offer them this beautiful life, but I wouldn't want any beautiful life if it wasn't with my own parents. Just all the emotions. People see adoption as this great, happy thing, but there's so much grief that's involved. There's so much sadness. There's such finality to it. This means there is no hope for me to go back to that other life. I was so nervous thinking about what was going to be going through their little brains for my own peace of mind, or just to get my mind ready. I guess I said to one of the foster moms, I said, could you just record their responses? Because even if they're devastated, even if they're just so sad about having to move to a new home, I need to be aware of that and I need to be sensitive to that. We want to see how they feel. We were pretty upfront with them about our intentions. We didn't want to say, we're a new home that you can move into for another couple of months. I feel like God has made me an adoptive mom because I just couldn't be the mom that was like, yeah, we're going to give you this great life. And then 5 months later, good luck. I don't know where you're going to be later. And just side note, at one point I had our adopted daughter write a timeline of her life. Just give me a timeline of where you lived and when. She said to me first, "Do you want me to include hotel rooms too?" She had about 30 dots on her timeline of all these different places that she has lived. And I just wanted that for them. I wanted to say, this is your forever. So their video that I showed, and maybe I'll link it in the show notes of them finding out, was the biggest gift to my heart to see them jumping up and down and celebrating, knowing everything they have been through. So that already was like a warm blanket of this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So we had a pretty short-ish transition time of come over for dinners. We took them to wrestling practice. We just had fun. We played a full-blown soccer game because we have enough players to have a whole team. And we just did so much fun things that I think is really important. But now we're the parents. No more fun to be had. No, I'm just kidding. But in the beginning, they call it this honeymoon phase, which we for sure had this wonderful honeymoon phase.
So when did they move in full time?
Even the timing of that was miraculous. So we were just praying. We had our whole community, please pray that we will get custody of our children before we get on the airplane. And the judge signed the papers 2 days before we got on the airplane. It was the coolest. Another one of those moments that you're like, wow, God, I can't believe that you made that work in the last minute. So we got custody of them, I think June 16th. They got on the airplane June 18th. And then we had the Stay Fit Mom retreat. I can barely remember that, Krista. I was so nervous about so many things, and my brain was in 10 different places, and my new kids were on an airplane with Chris all by himself, 6 children for the first time. So then the rule is that they have to live with you for 90 days before you can even file for adoption. So they lived with us for 90 days. Then we filed, and we just celebrated our 1 year, October 18th. And November is actually Adoption Awareness Month. So by the time everyone's listening to this,
Perfect. My eyes have been watering up and my nose is running now. Okay, so it's been a whole year. Do you have any funny stories to share about the kids moving in and you guys all becoming a family?
there's this one story that I just cannot forget. So we're not adopting babies here. We have children that are tweens, by the way. We have a now 12-year-old girl, an 11-year-old boy, and a 10-year-old boy. So these are kids that are on the edge of puberty. One time, our daughter hits her brother in the nuts with a ping pong paddle. And I made the comment, I want to have grandchildren one day. You cannot hit your brother there. All of them, all 3 were like, what do you even mean by that? And I was realizing, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to give them a sex talk. I remember all of them are up in this one bedroom, and I have this whiteboard, and I'm drawing diagrams, and I'm like, this is how this works. And the looks on their faces, you could tell nobody in their life had ever told them anything like this before. And our son says, I don't care what you say, I'm never doing that. Never. And it was just one of those moments where I was like, oh, buddy, I can't wait to talk about this when you're older.
I imagine that you've had to have a lot of serious discussions with all the kids. I also want to ask because I remember you telling me this story and I just feel like it's so sweet. Explain to us when you told your family, specifically when you told your mother that you were going to adopt these kids.
Gosh, I forgot about that story. You thought you were crying before, Krista. Just telling my family was it's kind of harder than you think to tell your family that you're going to adopt. I think that the immediate family, they're so protective over your biological children. And so they're like, whoa, 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 you're doing what to my grandkids or my nephews? Whoa. So that is kind of like the gut reaction. But my mom lost her parents when she was 11 years old, and she was orphaned at 11. And I'm telling her about this little girl that we're going to get that's 11. And she just bawling her eyes out because she's like, I know how she feels. She's like, Tracy, this is going to be so hard for you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, mom. But she just has this connection with Cayman because she knows what it's like to be this young girl and have been through so much heavy life at such a young age.
Your mom spends a lot of time with you in Florida, travels to Florida, and will stay for weeks at a time, right?
Yes, both of our parents, Chris and I have the most wonderful support unit. Chris's parents are here right now. Chris's dad has been this tough wrestling coach guy, just tough as nails, was a concrete cement mason his whole life. So intense. Krista, you know exactly who he is. At any sporting event, he's yelling at the top of his lungs. And he texted Chris on his birthday and was like, I have never been more proud of my children ever. And I just thought, wow, this huge man who's seen Chris do these incredible things like win state championships in wrestling and go to college and get straight A's and become a pharmacist. And he has this long list of amazing gifts and talents and things that he's done. And to hear his dad say, nothing tops this, just so sweet.
I imagine Chris's parents are really close with all the kids too.
Yeah, that's one thing about living so far. It's really hard to live far away from your family, but we get this really sweet, precious time where my in-laws have moved in for a month and they're doing all of life with us. They've gone to every flag football game. They're going to church with us on Wednesdays. They're going to family outings. They're just in it. It's really cool to be able to spend such quality time with them, even though we don't get as much quantity.
Right. You've really got to get this new guest room done. You really need to work on this home renovation.
You know what? It's crazy, Krista, because it's so much money, this new renovation, more than our first house cost us. But I did say to Chris, well, we've done hard things before. I guess we're just going to keep saving like we always have.
Do you have any parenting hacks now that you're a mom of 6? Is there anything you do now that you didn't do before, or any tips and tricks for staying organized and on top of feeding all the kids?
When I tell people I have 6 kids, there's this shock factor. People are like, what? All those kids? That's the first reaction out of their mouth. But I think kids are overwhelming. There is this level of complete surrender. My brother has 2 kids, and they're in probably more activities than all 6 of mine combined. So I think that life with kids is just hard, no matter how many you have. And if you're sitting here listening, like, how does this lady do it? I remember having one and looking at people around me like, how the heck did they do it with more? You just figure it out. And I pray every day. I hope all my kids don't end up in major therapy down the road because I've ruined them. So I just want to get that out. Life is just hard. Our systems and routines have to be so dialed in. We have so many rules. And that's the one thing about having a big family that's a little bit hard for me. I come from a small family, only 2 of us. I got to have whatever snacks I wanted, whenever I wanted. My kids, you can't eat snacks 45 minutes before you eat dinner. You can't have a packaged snack unless you're out the door. You can only sit in the front seat if you are the oldest. We have so many little tiny rules that keep the wheels on the bus running. We have to do that, or else we battle so many arguments and fights.
Do you and Chris still get time to yourselves ever? Are you still doing date nights? Are you going on a vacation, just the 2 of you? What's that looking like?
Well, this summer we were in Vegas. I was like, we need just a little bit of a getaway. Leaving 6 kids is a whole lot bigger than leaving 3. So this summer we divided our kids. We had 2 go one place, 3 go another place, 1 go another place. And then we took 2 nights and we stayed at the Bellagio, just the 2 of us. And it was so nice. You just forget that you're this normal human being outside of all this responsibility. Oh, one other trip that we have planned as a family, we're going on a cruise for spring break. We did Disney World last year, and I said to Chris, never again. I cannot cook 85 muffins and make 120 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I'm just done with that. The next vacation we take has to be one where I'm not cooking anything. I'm so excited about it. Also, we're pretty strict with our kids about food. They only get desserts if they eat their vegetables. We have a lot of strict food rules. And Chris, he's like, we're all going to weigh in before the cruise. We're not going to have one rule, not one rule. If they want ice cream for breakfast, they can have ice cream for breakfast. We're just letting them do whatever they want. And then we're going to all weigh in at the end and see how much damage we do.
That's hysterical. And that is so Chris. Do you have any idea how much you spend on groceries a week, a month? It's got to be so much.
It's so much, Krista. So we spend $3,000 a month on groceries.
Groceries are expensive now, but I feel like that's a lot.
We have Walmart delivery come to our house just about every other day.
Wow. Have you ever had any like really hard moments? Anything you've had to overcome?
Yes. With it being Adoption Awareness Month, there's so many beautiful things about adoption. There's so much joy. There's so many high highs in adoption. But I also feel like there are so many low lows. This is harder than I would have guessed. And our kids are amazing. They're wonderful kids, but it's way hard. One of the things that is hard is it triggers me when our kids are ungrateful. It triggers me when my biological kids are ungrateful, when our adopted kids are ungrateful. And being ungrateful or being your real self is just a sign that you feel safe where you
Right.
are, but it's a huge trigger to me. I am like, oh no, we are not going to be talking about how you're jealous that Susie gets a Starbucks every day from her mom. That just sends me into a tizzy. I mean, that's like a trivial hard thing. But the other hard thing is that I know that they're thinking about their birth parents a lot. And I don't want to say jealous is the right word because it's not the right word. I said that a couple minutes ago that I would never want any other life, no matter how wonderful it is without my own parents. But
Right.
there is this part of them that I know just longs to be with their biological parents, and that's hard, and I have to constantly remind myself why I'm doing this. I'm not doing this to get a pat on the back from them. I'm doing this because this is what God's called me to. This is the role that He has given me, and I'm just gonna take it one day at a time. But there's so much hard things that come with them leaving their biological parents, and they also have a view of their biological parents, like rose-colored glasses, I guess you could say, and that's hard.
What would you say to someone who is contemplating adoption and worried about the challenges, especially with blending children?
I would say make sure that your motivation is in the right spot. Your motivation can't be that you're gonna be this hero to this child. Make sure that you have people around you that are gonna be of support. I've had to lean on our community so much, other adopted moms, other experts when it came for caring for kids that have been through trauma. And I would also say it's gonna be harder than you think. It's also gonna be more worth it than you think. One piece of advice that Cayman's foster mom gave me was you're going to want to think that the impact you're making on them is going to show up in a couple of months. But Tracy, this is such a long game. Think about when you invite them back into your home when they have kids of their own and you're a grandmother and you're all sitting around the Christmas tree. That's your goal. And that must be the life lesson that I keep having to relearn over and over. Persevere, even when it's tough or taking forever to see results.
Well, this was great. I loved hearing the story again. I feel like we could just go on and on. I could keep asking you so many questions, but I feel like we covered everything. Thank you for sharing your story with all of us.
Thanks for listening.
We appreciate you tuning in to the Stay Fit Mom podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Connect with us on social media and head to stayfitmom.com for more resources and tips. You've got this. See you next time.